Hey there, it's Faith Talk Live. I'm Rick Probst.
And I'm Dan Ratcliffe.
Hey, we're pumped to talk with Kevin Butcher. He's the executive director of Rooted Ministries. He's got a new book out. It is called Free. Kevin, how are you?
I'm pretty good this morning, guys. Thanks.
Well, yeah, you are not in our time zone, so you're a couple hours behind us, so we appreciate you. Well, I guess it's not too terribly early, but at least getting up a little bit early. That's
not
good.
bad. If you would ask me to get up at 6, we might have had to have a conversation.
We'll have to remember that next time. We'll never ask Kevin to get up at 6 o'clock. Hey, Kevin was a successful pastor and burned out basically at 35. And he's written a book to help. I think it helps all of us, basically. He's also the executive director of Rooted Ministries. Kevin, where do you want to go? You want to start out with Rooted Ministries and get to the book? How did you put this all together?
Well, I mean, when you hit 36 or 35 years old and you've got everything that Christianity and actually the world itself says you're supposed to have, and you've got every bit of educational background, 6 years of Greek, 2 years of Hebrew, 3 years of Latin,
wow,
and every kind of athletic success, even at the college level, academic success. And then one day you say to yourself, after another success, you say, I want to die. And you almost take your own life. It's like that was either I was going to go to glory at that moment, or there was going to be a reboot, and God saved my life miraculously and began to show me how much he loved me, which is the one thing with everything I knew. That's the one thing I didn't know.
Wow. And to have all that success that you just talked about, the athletics, the education, everything that the world would say, this guy's got it all.
Right. And even Christianity.
Yeah.
It says this is what it means, but I was empty inside.
Wow. How did you maintain the fact, or maybe you didn't, that Jesus loved you? Because, when you're on a level like that, it seems to me it's like, hey, everything's good. I must be pleasing God. We're 100%. How did you find the fact that, hey, you know what? There's love here for me, period.
Well, you know what Paul says in Ephesians 3, that unbelievable prayer that is kind of the pinnacle of the theology in Ephesians. He says, I pray that you might be rooted and grounded in the love of Christ that's so high and wide and deep and long, because to know that love is to be filled with all the fullness of God. So if we don't know that love personally, I don't think that was just a generic cosmological statement. If we don't know it personally, we have the opposite of fullness, which is emptiness. And that means we're searching for anything, including religious stuff. Good, it can be good stuff, but if a good thing becomes the main thing, it's a bad thing. The main thing is that God loved me personally enough to send Jesus. So when I almost took my own life, a mile from my home with 3 beautiful baby girls and my best friend, who was my life partner, I pulled the car back onto the freeway, went home, got on my face, and I said, God, I've got everything, but I've got nothing. What is it that I'm missing? And I'm not kidding you guys. A couple of days later, miraculously, because I don't know who gave this to me, a book by Brennan Manning called The Ragamuffin Gospel, which I'm sure you know, landed on my porch. And get this, I read it and I sobbed all the way through it. And I had the first experience. I mean, I knew all the Greek words for love. I could preach a sermon about how God loved you, but I hadn't experienced it since my conversion at the age of 5. It was all about the rules. It was all about just do it, get it done, listen to another podcast, get in another Bible study, memorize more verses, and all shall be well. It wasn't well. And when I read that book by Manning, I had the first experience of the love of God that I'd had in 31 years. And I said to God said to me, literally through his book, this is what you've been missing. This is you now for the rest of your life, abiding in the love of my love and the love of my precious son.
And that passage in Ephesians where he talks about being rooted, I'm assuming that's where the ministry was rooted. Rootedministries.co is the website. Talk about your heart in Rooted Ministries. What is the goal?
Well, first of all, successful pastor, but I wasn't rooted in that love. I was rooted in performance, and that performance led to death. Because if you're all about performance, guys, you know this, then you don't know love, you know shame. because you never quite measure up. You're always trying to measure up.
Yeah.
What I found is over the years, especially after that moment, as I hung out with other pastors, I wasn't alone. I'm not saying seminaries try to do this, but the educational institutions that train us have a tendency to move toward more of the performance mode. And honestly, I don't remember anybody ever asking me, do you, first, Kev, let's get first things first. Do you know that God loves you before you try to share that love with the world? I mean, when Jesus in John 13 says to his disciples, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, we kind of skip over that as if, of course we get that. I didn't get it. I found that most pastors struggle with that, and they struggle to be able to even be honest enough with anybody in their journey to be able to share something like that. So they're on this performance treadmill. They can't quite share honestly with their elders or their lead team because they hold the keys to their staying in that community. They hold the purse, they hold their salary, whatever. They can't really share appropriately, really honestly with their parish because those folk are looking up to them. They can be transparent, but not with the deepest stuff. So what I found is that most, like me, walk alone. And if you walk alone, struggling to know the love of God, it is death. And so my wife and I decided that if God would give us enough health, when we felt like it was time to say, we've been a lead pastor for 35 years, what can we give back? We wanted to be for pastors what, quite frankly, very few people had been for us.
Yeah.
Wow. That's Rooted Ministries.
Kevin Butcher, Executive Director of Rooted Ministries. The book is out, his latest book, and you want to pick that up. It's called Free, Rescued from Shame-Based Religion, Released into the Life-Giving Love of Jesus. As people around you, Kevin, saw the transformation, and no doubt, I mean, it wasn't overnight, right? But you know, a big giant step. And then as you move forward and still growing today, what did they say about you? Were they like, wow, finally, or wow, I never knew? What did they say?
Well, I mean, they saw the change. Quite frankly, just to be perfectly transparent, I don't think my marriage would have made it if this change had started to come. My kids began to see the change. It's funny. Over the years, you know, as I began to understand what shame is, where shame entered the world in Genesis 3, when Satan says the love of God is not quite enough. You need all these rules. You need the knowledge of good and evil, which produced immediate shame, immediate hiding. As I began to realize that and grow into rejecting shame and receiving love, my three girls began to just assimilate some of that truth. So sometimes, guys, when I would try to discipline them, and maybe I wasn't doing it in quite the right way, they would look at me and say, Dad, you're shaming me right now. I don't think that's the way it's supposed to be. So even my kids began to see and feel this transformation in their dad's life. I can remember, guys, when I first began to understand that love, it was winter in Michigan. This is going to sound so nuts, but I'm telling you, this happened. I'm driving down a side street, heading toward my office at the church, and there's a male person getting out of the truck, heading up toward a house. I can remember this moment. It's been 30 years. I remember it like it was yesterday. I wanted to get out of the car, go up to them, tap them on the shoulder gently and say, I've got to tell somebody this. I just found out that God is my Father. He's my Abba, and he loves me. Do you know that he loves you too? Now, thankfully, I drove on that day. I didn't get out of the car because that person might have gotten on their cell phone and called the local hospital. But that's the kind of newness that just exploded out of me. Now, guys, the enemy didn't say at that point, gosh, I've been trying to lock Kevin down in shame. Now he understands the love of God, so I'm going to move on to the next cat.
Right.
I wrestle still with Satan, what I believe is Satan's main attack mode, main method, which is shame, because that locks us down. It keeps us from living freely in the love of Christ and giving that love away to the brokenness around us. I have to fight that shame every day. I'm a lot better at it now than I was 30 years ago. I go to that far country a lot less. I come home a lot more quickly. But this is something that I will battle, and I think most of us will battle all the way home.
Wow. Kevin, let me, and this is going to be a softball, but it's so important, I think. Once you made that transition in your mind from being shame and guilt-based and trying to win God's approval to living in God's love, what was the difference?
Well, the difference is, when you're living in shame, you don't even really want to talk to God, because when you look at him, you think he's looking at you with that parental, the thing that we've saw with some of our own parents who did the best they could, of course. None of us are perfect parents.
Right.
That look of like, yeah, there you go. You'll never amount to anything. Right. We kind of feel that way about God. So all of a sudden, guys, my relationship with God changed. Instead of trying to go to this book because I was supposed to, because I had a sermon to preach, or, this is where I get my marching orders, I began to want to go here, because this is where I began to hear my Father. I mean, Genesis to Revelation. Tell me, I love you. And this is a pathway for you to walk, son, not because I'm pointing a finger at you saying, do it or else. But I'm inviting you to walk with me into this pathway of freedom, because I love you. It changed everything about my relationship with God. And then what I noticed that started to happen, guys, is that with that love in me, for me, from God, I began to see people differently. Now, it wasn't perfect. Of course, I could still get back into that shame place, and I could point fingers at folk and treat them poorly. But overall, I began to see people with the broken heart of Jesus, not because I was really spiritual or because I tried real hard, but because when I was saturated with the love of God, I couldn't see the brokenness around me any other way.
Wow. Kevin, that's so good. Kevin Butcher, Executive Director of Rooted Ministries. New book is called Free, Rescued from Shame-Based Religion, released into the life-giving love of Jesus Christ. Got to read that. RootedMinistries.co is the place to go. Kevin, we got to go to a break, but I would love to talk to you in the fall, catch up with you and see how the book's going and what you're working on for the rest of 2021, 2022.
Well, first of all, we're still working on making sure this message about this book gets out, of course. We're working on a Bible study that I hope Nav Press and Tyndale will, maybe they're even listening. I hope they are. I hope they'll buy this Bible study, because we want folks to be able to get into this book and then find the love of Christ, not just in the book, but in the scripture. That's why we're calling it a Bible study. And there's so much need right now, guys, with pastors and their families, not just pastors, but also their extended families. We have been graced with enough funding at this point. We just hired a 41-year-old pastor that I'm very, very close to. He actually calls me Pops. I mean, we're that close. And he's going to come alongside so that we can double our connectivity ability with pastors and their families. And the rest of this year is going to be about starting to create communities of pastors that can take off their masks and be present to one another with the love of Christ. That's where we're headed.
Awesome.
Good stuff. Kevin Butcher, check it out. Check out Rooted Ministries, and also read the book. We got to take a break. We'll be right back. I'm Rick Probst.
And I'm Dan Ratcliffe.
This is Faith Talk.